It is our teacher. It is our greatest teacher. And every shadow carries its own medicine. So behind anger is really power. Behind emotions like shame is really authenticity. So even grief, right? Grief is an emotion that really causes us to really feel bad about ourselves at times because it's not comfortable. Awesome.
Peace Unplugged.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. It's great for you to come on board. Now hopefully we're going to talk about shadow work today. I don't know an awful lot about it, so I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about it from your perspective and how you got into it, what you know about it.
Absolutely. This is a topic that I work with daily. I guess if I could I'll start by just introducing myself and give you a little bit of a background that would kind of help explain why I know so much about shadow work, if that's okay. So, my name is Carmen Marie. I'm a shamanic practitioner, angel investor, and film producer. So, my work weaves together two worlds. On one side, I guide individuals through healing and shadow work, helping them to integrate all of the unseen and unacknowledged parts of themselves. And on the other, I build platforms and communities and films that tell these kinds of transformational stories on a collective level. So for me, shamanism is about bridging worlds, the spiritual world and the material world, which means it's the unseen and the seen. And I'm really passionate about creating spaces where people can experience the integration work of that. So, a shaman is one who bridges worlds, the visible and the invisible, so that you can bring healing and balance back to people. So, organically, shadow work is a part of what I do. And when people ask me what shadow work is, I like to kind of just start with a simple truth, and that is that their shadow is everything about ourselves that we don't see or acknowledge, or sometimes that we just don't want to face. So it's the unexpressed emotions, all of the hidden fears that we hold, the old wounds, and often buried gifts that we're not ready to accept. So we push them down into the unconscious. And that's where our shadow lives, is in the unconscious. So shamanically, we say that the shadow holds fragments of our soul, which are the pieces that splintered off during painful moments or trauma moments. That could be rejection, shame, and these pieces of self don't disappear. They stay in hiding, and they wait for us to return to them to bring them home. So why is it called shadow work? It's because shadow work is only half of the equation, right? The work is the process of alchemy. So we have the shadow, and then we say shadow work. The work part is the alchemy of the shadow. It's active engagement of meeting the parts of ourselves that have been hidden and sitting with it. And not just sitting with it, but transforming that wisdom into light. So I hope that was a good explanation of what shadow work is. I know it only touches the surface.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good introduction. So it does interest me because some of the little bit of investigations I've done around this myself just recently, or seen little bits of clips. One of the things I'm guilty of is procrastination. I quite often I start projects and don't finish them, or I get close to getting a success of something, and then some kind of fear comes in the way,
Absolutely.
and it's almost like it's like in the very practical terms, it's a little bit about is this really for me? Is this what my destiny is or not, or am I just going to fail again? And I sometimes I put it down to perhaps parts of growing up, and actually, maybe being sort of shamed into you can't do this, you can't do that. My parents are very much like, you don't need to show off. You mustn't show off. You mustn't raise your head above the parapet. So very much told to keep very quiet. I didn't really break out of that until really my mother passed away.
Mhm.
Bless her heart. I loved her to bits. But I think
Oh,
it was the kind of her spirit that when she was alive that held me back. Once she had finally passed after a long illness, I got a sense of freedom that I could really be myself, not be not pretend to be someone else. Does that kind of fit around the kind of the shadow stuff that we're talking about?
Absolutely. We are all born into different situations, different stories, and all of that sticks with us. And I think, especially when we're talking about mindfulness or holistic work or healing, we like to think of the light side of it, like finding the light or chasing the light, but we naturally live in a universe of polarity, just like, we have the yin and yang, night and day, inhale, exhale, light and dark. To only seek or search for light or for wellness or well-being, it denies half of existence in a way. So shadow work is about the integration of that. It's alchemizing the lessons of the shadow so that we embody the light, which is exactly what you're talking about, of realizing, hey, I'm starting to recognize that this side of me that wants to keep myself small and keep myself hidden, that's not really me at my core. That's not who I am. That is conditioning that I've been, brought into, and shedding that conditioning is a part of the shadow works. For if people want to know, like, how do I recognize the parts of myself that are in shadow? The answer to that is triggers. So triggers are something we work with and we face every day, all day, just in normal interaction with people in our everyday lives. So triggers are really the primary way in which the shadow reveals itself to us. And a trigger is really simply just an emotional charge, right? It feels kind of even bigger than the situation might be. So, maybe someone says something to us that stings a little bit, right? Like, hey, you don't want to be too loud, or be quiet, or don't be too out there and full of yourself, whatever it is. We feel that emotional charge, and it can sting in a way that is a little bit disproportionate. Perhaps with your mother, I don't know her background, but I'm sure that where she came from was a very similar existence, right? I would imagine that she grew up learning those lessons of kind of staying humble and needing to, kind of be in these smaller situations. So it's just what we walk with. And it's important because that shadow, it really comes alive when our trauma filters become activated, right? So the trauma is what programs us to perceive the world in a certain way. So it creates a preconceived notion of what is safe, what is acceptable, what is unsafe, right? And what should be and what shouldn't be, whatever it is. Those triggers, or when someone else's behavior kind of crosses an invisible line that we've set, our nervous system reacts to it, right? Whether they're right or wrong, or their way of seeing the world is right or wrong, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the way in which it triggers us. And this right here is where the work part begins, because triggers show us where the unhealed parts of ourselves are moving forward, right? And if we're not aware of it, then we start to project outwardly by blaming others. We start to spiral into shame, or we shut down out of fear. And that's when we start to leak and bleed energy. This is where it starts to become problematic in our daily lives, right? Because we're basically giving our power to the outside world. So if we can pause and recognize the trigger, right? Or recognize, hey, this isn't really me. Where is this coming from? Then we can ask, what part of me is this? What part of me is this trigger awakening? Where does it come from? Why do I perceive the world in this way? Then those triggers go from, not just a wounding, but it turns into that doorway to healing. It allows for that portal of transformation to even be possible. So that's where, the healing modalities come into play. That's why mindfulness matters, and yoga and breath work and all of these different modalities that we have. So,
That's really great. I mean, as you probably realise, I'm a mindfulness practitioner, sort of a retired drugs and alcohol worker, and I spent a good 10 years practicing mindfulness. And as you said, really, it's really interesting to hear that for me, it was kind of seeking the light all the time and not wanting to acknowledge the dark side of things, because the dark side of things for me have always been a bit scary. It's all, I've had had some, kind of spiritual experiences in the past which have been really quite uncomfortable. I think, like a lot of people, a sense of depression has fallen on me in the past
Yeah.
where I've been unable to move. That's, say, very, very frightening. So the prospect of kind of looking into that is does feel scary. So how do we? Is anybody's out there that's listening here or watching this today and feels the same way as I do about it? How do we go about overcoming that, Carmen? How do we go about approaching that in a way that that can be balanced, if you like, can be managed?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I want to acknowledge some things that you said because, alcoholism really is, it's a coping mechanism because we feel like there is something wrong, right? Depression happens when we are disconnected from the world, right? And we disconnect ourselves because we feel like something's wrong. So, the key thing that I want people to understand about shadow work is not, it has nothing to do with getting rid of the shadow, getting out of it, getting out of the dark, or there's something wrong with me, making myself better, whatever it is. It's really about befriending it, allowing it to become a part of your life, because our shadow aspects are not our enemy, right? It is our teacher. It is our greatest teacher. And every shadow carries its own medicine. So behind anger is really power, behind emotions like shame is really authenticity. So even grief, right? Grief is an emotion that really causes us to really feel bad about ourselves at times because it's not comfortable. But what is grief? Grief is love. So by doing the work, we start to reclaim the gifts that are hidden within the wound, so to speak. So shadow work becomes that path to wholeness, and it makes us free, it makes us powerful, and as you mentioned, it makes us balanced. So ultimately, it makes us a lot more compassionate humans, because when we integrate our shadow, we stop projecting those wounds onto the world around us, right? Then we can really start connecting, which alleviates depression, which alleviates the need to cope, right? So before I guess I share some ways in which to begin with shadow work, I kind of want to highlight what happens when shadow work isn't done. Right, when we don't give way for or this path to healing. So when we avoid the work part, the alchemy work, it doesn't mean that the shadow just disappears. It's only gonna grow, right? So some of the things that start to happen around us is projection. So we unconsciously start to project what we dislike in ourselves onto others. What we see wrong with ourselves, we now see wrong in the world. So this starts to create those cycles of blame and judgment and conflict, which then kind of creates these repeating patterns. Old wounds start to repeat themselves through our relationships, our jobs, and really just our overall life circumstances until we address them. And again, as I mentioned, this is where our energy starts to leak. So all of the unhealed trauma or unhealed triggers begin to cause us to bleed energy, which leaves us feeling really exhausted, unmotivated, reactive, and kind of stuck in loops of shame and fear, which causes the depression, which causes the feeling of needing to suppress with alcohol, which disconnects us from the world. So when we make way for shadow work, what we're really doing is integrating. We're integrating these lessons and allowing ourselves to embody the version of ourselves that feels good, right? So when we do the shadow work, we feel whole, we feel balanced, we're able to reclaim parts of our soul that have been rejected. And we start to kind of just feel more at home in our own body, which is really important. That's where we live, that's where the soul lives. So it's important to feel good in the body. We start to have more compassion for others when we are able to integrate that shadow. Then we stop projecting that shadow onto other people. So this makes you, more understanding and a lot less judgmental. And overall, it allows us to lead a life in alignment, right? We want to radiate energy that is clear and that is a truly authentic vibration of inner self. And when we start to resonate that vibration, then life begins to flow differently in an alignment because we're not resisting those parts of ourselves. So it's important to, when we talk about doing shadow work, we do want to acknowledge the chakras, which is our energy body that lives in and around our field. So our chakras really are the portal for this shadow work, right? Because each and every center holds both the light expressions and all of our shadow distortions, right? And I won't go through all of the chakras, but each one kind of navigates a different aspect of emotion. So how we begin to recognize the shadow, I think, is the first part in doing the work. And again, the shadow always speaks through the triggers. So this is kind of just bringing awareness, right? Every time a trigger or any situation that causes some type of an emotional charge, that's a little disproportionate to the moment that's happening. This is a sign that there's something out of balance. So bringing awareness to it first, putting a name to it, naming it. I'm triggered right now. Okay. I've now brought awareness to it. What is triggering me? What about this situation or this person am I judging? What am I is activated right now, right? So that's kind of how we start to recognize the shadow, and then we can start to shed light on it. So that we can do that in many different ways. There's types of modalities that are really good for shedding light on the shadow, right? And then there's modalities that are really good for helping to integrate the lesson or the wisdom of the shadow, if you will. So some of the modalities that are really great at helping us to see or to reveal and to name the shadow are things like journaling and writing prompts. I definitely encourage to do this daily so we could get that stream of consciousness flowing, right? Because that's where the shadow lives, is in the unconsciousness. So we want to allow that stream to just be active and flow. And we can ask ourselves questions like, what do I judge most in others? Okay. And then what am I afraid to admit to myself? Because oftentimes where we hold judgment of others, we're judging ourselves. That's that projection part. That's that mirror work. So mirror work is another great modality for shedding light on those triggers and bringing awareness to the shadow. And that's a practice you can do by just in the mirror, looking at your own eyes and speaking uncomfortable truths out loud, right? Noticing, what do I judge in others? I'm going to say this out loud as I look at myself in the mirror, just allowing yourself to talk to yourself, right? Talk therapy. Talk therapy is a great one, even just with a friend, being able to verbalize what we feel and not shove it down. That's a really big one. I know it seems so simple, but people really struggle with even just putting words to their feelings. Shamanic journeying is a great modality for shedding light because it allows us to meet the shadow aspects of ourselves in spirit form by kind of going inward and having these experiences. Art is a great one. Creative expression. So painting, dancing, free movement, it really just allows emotion to flow and not feel stuck in the body. And one of my favorites is trigger tracking. I really talk about triggers a lot because, noticing and journaling or even taking voice note, whatever it is, being able to have a place to express the trigger, right? Because then we can be aware of the story that we're telling ourselves in that moment, in that exact moment, right? Like if someone came late to a podcast, for example, right? It could really upset somebody and make it feel personal. Someone could really say like, oh, they don't value my time. Why am I doing this? And it could really create that disconnect when perhaps, the other person doesn't put any weight or value on time constraints, right? Maybe they're just like, hey, I'm lucky I can do this. I'm here. So one person sees a problem, one person doesn't. And it creates that disconnection instead of saying, where did I get this that if someone's late, they don't care about me? Right? Where does that come from? And then the modalities for integrating shadow work are some of those deeper, more the modalities that really support the embodiment aspect. So that's breath work, somatic practices, energy healing, like Reiki or chakra movement is another one. Ritual and ceremony is great, fire rituals, things that kind of are symbolic actions to transformation and honoring the shadow. And I would say community is a big modality for really allowing for the integration of the shadow. So being in safe group spaces where we can share and allow ourselves to be witnessed, and really most importantly practice new ways of relating without projecting. That's a big one, is relating without projecting. So so shadow work really isn't complete until both steps are honored, right? First, we We need the modalities that help us shed the light on all that is hidden. That becomes the awareness stage. But then we need the integrative work to be able to I guess, allow us or make way for us to embody the lesson and really live the transformation. Otherwise, then the shadow work just becomes intellectual. It just becomes something we talk about. But the true alchemy is when that insight becomes embodied. It becomes something that we've transformed.
It is, I agree, it's very much about the feeling. A lot of what you've talked about there is a kind of a bit of a reflection of some of the when I was working with clients, and I'd often say afterwards, I've talked to clients about ways of recovery or talking about recovery things or ways of getting better. And I'd become distinctly aware that actually I'm not just talking to them. In fact, actually I'm talking to myself.
Yes.
And so I'd be saying these things and sometimes you can feel like a bit of a charlatan but I really become aware of actually I'm counseling myself as well as trying to help other people, and the understanding is
Absolutely.
al and al also again about it's not necessarily about giving it well, it isn't really about giving advice, it's about helping people to find their answer.
I think that's really what is beautiful about healing in community is that we become the mirrors to each other, right? Like what we project out into the world, we're going to see reflected back at us. And when we can kind of reflect and express what we see, we're really releasing that in ourselves, right? Because if it wasn't within ourselves, we wouldn't see it in another person because it's all coming from our lens of perception. And that's what's beautiful about reality. And, I talk a lot about quantum principles when I talk about shadow work because when we talk about healing modalities and mindfulness and all of these things, there's this concept or idea that it's just woo woo work, right? It's just spiritual work and there's no real science behind it. But in quantum physics, particles exist in multiple states until they are observed. So similarly, we exist in multiple timelines and versions of ourselves. Your consciousness, your repressed self, your higher self are all existing at the same time. And shadow work collapses those possibilities into coherence, right? Into the present and into the now. So by observing the hidden aspects of ourselves with awareness, we're now shifting them from the unconscious potential into conscious integration. Even quantum physics validates the work that we should be doing to really integrate that shadow self. Quantum entanglement is where two particles, I don't want to get too complicated. Basically, your shadow aspects are entangled, right? We're entangled. So that means that it affects, it's not just like I'm just going to leave this there and deal with it when I'm ready to deal with it. It's actively affecting your choices, your relationships, and the outcomes of your day-to-day life, even if they're hidden, even if you don't want to acknowledge them, they are affecting your choices. So shadow work allows us to detangle fear and shame and trauma, and then reestablish a harmonious connection so our field vibrates in alignment so that we don't have this part doing that and that part doing this. We're integrated and we're resonating from the now. So it's really important because I know people think like, I'll deal with this when I want to deal with it. But we can really live a much more balanced and aligned life when we make way for it. So I always like to talk about that a little bit because, it's a quantum principle. Quantumly, consciousness is the observer effect. So when we are courageous enough to face our shadow, then we're observing it with presence. And this is what changes the energetic pattern that starts to resonate out in the field and attract back to us. So if we want to live a more aligned life where we don't have to deal with the loops of depression and anxiety and all of this, then we have to be willing to address the forgotten parts of ourselves, right? We've got to be willing to make way for bridging these two together. The light, the light, dark.
Yeah, yeah, and there was something that really struck me earlier when you were talking about anger as like being an energy source behind it. It's about re-understanding what we know up to now, what I know up to now, or what I think I know, and then actually gain the wisdom to learn something a bit further. I think with
I
my
like
own,
that.
with my own journey and journey I've had with helping people myself is there's things that we learn about ourselves through time. I mean, the last couple of years, one of the things that I came across is my own sense of neurodivergence. When I discovered that, I began to understand it. It made an awful lot of sense where I'd had problems communicating with other people through my life, through childhood, through school, and certainly through the workplace. And I used to get really frustrated in those situations. But now I have an understanding of why that happens because I communicate in a slightly different way, perhaps to what neurotypical people do, and that creates a bit of discord. So understanding that, I'm able to make a little bit of an adjustment I might be
Wow.
tempted to actually really want to say something and say something straight away, or have a real strong opinion about something. They go, "Whoa, wait a minute, just hold back a
Yeah.
little bit. It just do I really need to say
Yeah.
that right now?"
I love that I love that you're talking about your neurodivergence, because I do think, especially in this industry that we're in with holistic healers, we all have these patterns of neurodivergence. And I think it's important to talk about because, it doesn't, it's not what creates the shadow, but it can it shapes how the shadow expresses itself, right? And then the how in which it's perceived by others. So, many divergent people, I'm also neurodivergent myself. We learn how to mask, right? In order to fit into these neurotypical expectations. So that means that the authentic self is then pushed down. And over time, that suppression becomes the shadow, right? That's all of the hidden needs, the emotions, and all of the gifts that were judged as too much or not enough, right? Even what you just said of like asking yourself, does this need to be shared right now? Why not? If it's what you want to express, allowing it to come out and then allowing what you say to be that mirror to people. You're going to trigger people. That's what we're here to do. We're each other's mirrors. Your job is to trigger people, but that trigger has nothing to do with you, right? If they're upset about something that you said, but you didn't intend to hurt them, right? Or disrupt anything, then that is their shadow. And you get to be the one to shed the light on that shadow. So, the neurodivergent nervous system just feels everything more intensely, right? So this sensitivity amplifies triggers. So what might feel small to other people can start to feel really active, and it starts to activate these deeper wounds that we have, the shame and rejection wounds. Being afraid of what other people how they might perceive what you have to say is a rejection wound, which also sheds light on abandonment fears, right? I'm afraid that if I upset them, they will no longer be my friend, or maybe they won't feel safe around me. Whatever it is kind of that fear of abandonment. So, with my neurodivergent, my spicy friends, I like to say, hey, just know that, being different will attract misunderstandings or criticism, and that shadow can take place as an internalized feeling of shame or feeling like I'm broken or there's something wrong with me. And of course, this is not, inherent to just neurodivergence, but it is the way that society is used to conditioning, each other. So I love that. And you know what? I think, to be honest, I truly believe that neurodivergence is a superpower. It really is.
Yeah,
And I hope that you
yeah.
celebrate that part of yourself because I think it makes you cool.
If we speak different languages, or if we come from different backgrounds and have different ways of living, when we
Yes.
communicate, we are effectively neurodivergent to each other because there will be a
Yes.
misunderstanding of culture. If we come from a different culture. So, that's why often, isn't it, I'm not greatly traveled, but I'm really aware of the fact that sometimes when you meet somebody from a different culture, and they might say something to you, or you might say something to them that they can be offended by.
Yeah.
And it's not that it's intended to be offensive. It's just it's a different way of communicating. I can remember
Absolutely.
the little story. A friend of mine, an old friend, I still contact with him today. Actually, although he's gone back to live in India, but he worked with him about 20 years ago in the UK. And I'd be driving in the car, and he just turned the radio station over. And I think, why did you turn the radio? It's my radio. It's my car. what are you doing with?" But, he wasn't being offensive, but in his culture, it was okay to do that. And I often find that with, it's really interesting with people from Africa, from some, especially sort of the central, the Nigerians and so on. Often they don't have a concept of time like we do. So if they're late, that's all right, okay. What's time? You'll get there when we get there. Whereas I think in the sort of the very English sense of the world I've been brought up in is that being on time is really important. And I'm really aware of the fact that actually that, if I'm late and somebody's offended, I offend myself if I'm late. Strangely enough, I think, no, I shouldn't be. I must be on time. Where does that come from? It comes from something that's
Yes.
been embedded, I think, in me as I've been brought up as a child, and it's become some kind of value, for the want of a better of a word, that's been brought up with, but actually that some people don't have those values. So we kind of have to, other people don't have those. So we just kind of accept that actually it doesn't make it right or wrong. And if other people can live their lives in harmony in the way that, that they do, if African people can live the way where time is not so important, what's wrong with that? Why not?
Yeah.
It's,
What's funny is
that's just a couple of,
I love those examples, and
yes.
I think it's moments like that, right? Like the moments that you have that kind of help you bring awareness to it, I think are so powerful. I've had some similar situations where I really realized like, okay, it's just it's a cultural difference because I'll give a funny example as well. So in my household growing up, my aunts and my uncles would call us like dorks, like, "Oh, you're such a dork," you know? But it was said lovingly. It was always said like just out of care, like just kind of being funny, like you're being such a dork. It was never anything offensive. It was never anything said mean. And it was in my early 20s and I was dating this guy that I really liked. And every time he was just being kind of goofy, I would say this to him. I would say, like, "Oh, you're such a dork." Finally, he told me, like, that really, I don't like that. Like, that really pisses me off. And I was like, well, wait, what? And it turns out that as when he was growing up, he was bullied by being called a dork and he always had a negative connotation to it. And I did it clicked that like, whoa, like I'm glad you told me how you felt instead of just, secretly allowing it to kind of build up. But that's when I realized like even the words that we choose to use, can have different meanings for different people or different emotions charged or attached to them. And it really kind of helped me to start looking at that world in that way of like, okay, what we're really doing is we may be communicating, but we're speaking very different languages. And that helped me a lot too, is when I realized, like, okay, I didn't feel I was being offensive in any way, but he definitely did. And so I had to honor that. But it helped me notice when I talk, when I'm talking to someone, I'm really paying attention, like which word may have triggered, and then I readjust, like, and it's silly. I don't know if you've heard of the word dork, being where you are, but
Yeah, I have.
have you ever heard? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so kind of similar situation.
We hear it more and see, I think probably more on the television from watching American TV programs, but the word does get used over here. So I say, again, it's really interesting. I've got some people I've connected with are used, and the little nuances between, we speak the same language, but there are nuances in the way that those are communicated. And he talks about it in a comedic way. So we can almost, like a little self-depreciating humor about it. And it's beautiful. It's really, it's more than here. There's a couple of people who do it. They talk about guys that come over here, over the UK from England, go, what I love about England is this is different, or that is different, or things are said in a different way, or people behave in different ways, say different things. Just like the nuance about
Absolutely.
catching. I think one of the things that Darryl noticed is that making eye contact with somebody in the UK that you don't know is what he notices is that what we do is we tend to politely smile. So you'll catch like and go, okay, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to smile at you and perhaps nod my head and
Yeah.
then walk on by. And I don't know. I guess
Yeah.
that's a very English thing to do, But so in America, maybe it's different. There's a different different, and probably different parts of America, there's different cultures with that as well.
Yeah, that to me is what I love the most about humanity is that we're a big box of crayons. And that's what I think at the end of the day, why shadow work is so important because we want to free ourselves from the patterns and the loops and the stories that don't align with what we truly want and desire out of life. And so it can hold us back from connecting with people, because like you mentioned, there are so many nuances. And in order to get past the nuances, we have to be able to feel and see within ourselves which part of our connection is out of alignment with what we're really in desire of, which is just human connection. Everybody, I don't care who you are, what I've noticed the most is that the core of everyone's patterns that they're breaking, or trauma, really is connection. We want love, we want to belong in community. And so that's why this work really is important, so that we can move about in the world connecting to people's true essence and their soul, and not placing judgment on ourselves and others. So I think it's really important work, and why I love doing what I do and working with people.
Yes, I find it. Do you do you find that sometimes again, I'm picking up through my life really is that there's a extra sense that perhaps moving in a certain direction, perhaps maybe being encouraged to move in a certain direction or behave in a certain way, and then you kind of become notice it's not comfortable, but then that discomfort is hidden, is unconscious, and then the more it goes along, it becomes more conscious, and then there becomes and there's like a denial going on, and then suddenly realise that actually, no, this is not for me. Not, this is not who I am. You're telling me I need to do this or speak in this way, or speak to somebody in a certainly in the workplace. Working with clients, there will be some kind of sort of rules and regulations on how you communicate with a client. And you mustn't say this, and you mustn't
Right.
say that, or you mustn't open yourself up too much. And I found that then I found myself not being genuine anymore.
Right.
And
Yep.
that's not to say that you know that's not to say that there aren't some important boundaries to have. But I think when we're aware of those boundaries and how they work, then actually we can still manage that. I think it's a very in the sort of because the work almost becomes corporate. So it's like you must do this and you must do that. There must be a time limit on how long you spend with somebody in a session. And I would kind of want to reject that because if I'm working with somebody and I'm making some progress and they're happy to make that progress, then if the time moves, then so be it. You know,
Right.
um, and, and we can manage it between us. So, as long as if it's myself and the client, and the client's happy to go a bit over time, and then we'll do that. If one of the others is not happy with that, then I learned to actually be really honest and open and say,
Yeah.
actually, time's running out. I've got other things I need to do. And also again, this comes into it. It's all this kind of the energy balance with working with somebody. You ever feel that with a client and you feel your own energy being drawn out, like your own energy is
Right.
being almost like being stolen. We used to what's what we used to call energy
Yes.
vampires. You come out of a
Yes.
session really having worked really hard with somebody and then feel absolutely drained, as if
Absolutely.
all of your energy's been stopped. All the energy's been stolen and haven't got anything left for anybody else. So I can't
Yes.
go for various tangents, but you hear where I'm coming from, yeah? You know that, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's why it's so important for practitioners, even with what you're doing now with podcasting and just talking to people. You're talking to so many different people. You're talking to people with so many different nuances, right? And there's kind of like this constant dance of trying to read it and mold it and movement and connect with it. It is extremely draining, and there is a need to remember our protection practices and do our own shadow work, because when we work with people, especially the energy or the vampire energy suckers, is that it's pulling parts of ourselves that are not embodied, right? And so even that feeling allows us to kind of assess, like, oh, I'm so drained right now. Looking at things like, what did that activate in me, right? Like, what did that pull out of me? Why was that so energetically draining? And holding our rituals and kind of our practices in the balance of energy is always important. But I think it must be really interesting, podcasting, talking to so many different people, um, from different places with different stories. I'm sure that in itself it's draining, but I'm sure it's really powerful to kind of be a witness to all of the different stories and nuances that exist. Do you find that really, like, what part of podcasting, I guess, or storytelling do you enjoy the most? I'm curious.
I love it. I love it because I've always enjoyed. Learned a few years ago that actually talking to people and learning about people, trying to learn about what makes another person tick, and that becomes even more fascinating when you're talking to somebody that's from the other side of the planet because it's a completely different upbringing, and it's why I like to kind of work very organically in the way that I do it, because can always be something fascinating and revealing and gain wisdom from that. And I think, again, that probably fits with the shadow work, is actually we learn something about ourselves by actually talking to somebody else and learning about somebody else's perspective. It's rather than becoming stuck in a kind of rigid point of view. I can remember having in probably in the depths of depression time a few years ago about being very stuck and brittle in opinions, being very black and white. So I can remember
Right.
saying to a pastor once, there are only good and bad people in the world, and I truly believed it at the time. And
Yeah.
then I learned much later that it's far, far more complex than that. It's that
Yeah.
there's so much more. But that being stuck, and I call it brittle because when it's brittle, it feels like it's hard, but then when it breaks, it properly breaks.
Hmm.
So,
That's a good analogy
you
because it
know,
does seem hard on the surface, but it breaks easily.
yeah, yeah. It's very much like that. I talk to people about setting goals or setting. I like to use the word outcomes because an outcome is a presupposition that it's going to happen, rather than a goal can be something that could be missed. But it's like I think of it as like I'd say to people, think of it like plasticine. If you or clay, if you pay attention to it and you all the time you pay attention to it, you can mold it. So you might have an idea about, somebody might say, "Oh, I want to do this in my life," but it could be molded into something different later on. If it's left alone, it'll go hard and brittle and crumble. So
Very beautiful.
that's the another little analogy or metaphor, if you like. That this has been a really great conversation. I'll say, Carmen, that I feel like it often happens is one of the reasons why I like to like to podcasts, because I think I can actually say that I always learn something. I always learn
Yeah.
something new. I learn something new about other people, and therefore I learn something about myself, and that's the motivation of life as far as I'm concerned. And I like to be
Yeah.
able to share
Beautiful.
that with people that tune in and listen. And if it's recorded and it's laid down, it's there forever, long after we've gone. Even if you get to years and years go by and you think, oh, no one's ever going to watch or see this. We don't know. It may happen.
Right.
You think about the great composers who, in their lifetime, were virtually unknown, yet hundreds of years later are completely revered. So we never know, do we?
That's what it means to build a legacy, to leave legacy behind.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you, my usual question, Carmen, because my podcast is called Peace Unplugged. I'm gonna ask you to reveal to me what brings you peace.
It's a great question. Gratitude brings me peace. Gratitude brings me peace. 40, I'm about to be 41 in a week. And I feel like the last 5 years of my life, I've gone through enough to just appreciate every part of it, every part of the journey, and to be grateful for even just the lungs or the air in my lungs, and the ability to wake up every morning and have a fresh start. Every new day brings a new opportunity, and I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful to be here. And I think once I got to that place of leaning in on gratitude, peace is just the byproduct of that.
That's lovely. Thank you for that. And finally, I'd like you to shamelessly give the opportunity for you to tell us about what you do, and how people could contact you if you've got, if you've got some kind of business running, or even if it's not a business, even if it's something that you do, how you like to help people, how they can contact you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Carmen Marie. I'm a shamanic practitioner. I help guide people through the shadow aspects of themselves, bringing themselves into alignment and living a balanced life. What I'm really, really passionate about is the platform and community that I've started. It's called The Village, and it's an ecosystem. It's a place where seekers and guides can connect and really just go through life together, where we witness each other, where we explore growth and transformation together. We have live events almost daily put on by people in the village. It's a place with a lot of available digital resources, video resources. You can find everything from meditation videos to articles and interviews. It's just a beautiful community to just come and be and find your authentic self. So you could find us on Instagram, I think is the best place to start, at houseofhealing.co. So I will say one thing that's always interesting about these plugs is that the spelling is different. So it's House of Healing with two E's. HEELING, because it represents the surrender. It's a healing to our higher selves, to the source of life, whatever it is. It's healing, and people always get confused. They're like, is that a typo? I'm like, no, it's intentional, but it always makes it a little confusing. Yeah, we're on Instagram, houseofhealing.co, and find us, join us, and if anybody was interested in exploring their own shadow work or working with a shamanic practitioner, I'd love to connect, and yeah, just start by getting to know you.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Carmen. Thank you for being part of Peace Unplugged today.